So you can experience that wash of emotion as an experience, not who I am. It doesn't mean I'm unable to cope. It's just a wash of anxiety. And then I'm going to choose what to do with it.
For somebody tuning in right now, they're experiencing low mood, and this is a very subjective term. It has a lot of variance there, but they're feeling down, and they want to make sure they have all the basics covered when it comes to mental health. What areas should they be looking at?
Sure. So I think it's really people have the tendency to perhaps choose things that are the most expensive or the most complex because we assume that those things are going to be most effective and sophisticated. And actually, a lot of the things that have the biggest impact on our mental health day to day are the things that we would call the basics, right? Because we assume that they're simple, but actually they are the first things we let slide when we're not doing so good. And those things are, the foundations of good mental health. I would say social connection, good quality social connection, nutrition, and what everything that we're putting into our bodies, food wise, and also being hydrated. Exercise, moving your body on a regular basis, good sleep, and a sense of routine. So those 5 things, and I say that, we let them slide, is because people often say, oh yeah, that's fine. But we see them as negotiable. So, I'll sleep when this project's over, or, I'll start eating well after the holiday or whatever it is. And so we kind of, we see those things as things that we can let slide every now and then. And they inevitably then take their toll. And if we can build on those things, what it provides for us is a really solid foundation so that when life throws things at us like it does, tough times, for example, then we are in a much better place to be able to cope with those things if we've got that solid foundation. You take anyone on this earth, don't care who they are, and you start messing around with those 5 things, that person will become vulnerable to not only becoming mentally unwell, but also physically unwell. It plays with everything. So I would say always come back to those things, not in a perfectionist way that says I must do them all perfectly all of the time, but in a way that says, okay, well, let's just, I often encourage people to just jot them all down on a Post-it note, stick it on the inside of your wardrobe door or somewhere that you see every day. And then every day ask yourself, what's one thing I could do today to slightly improve one of these? So maybe I haven't eaten that well this week. What's one thing I could do today to, add vegetables into my dish? Or, I haven't seen my friends for a week. Is there a time I could pick to have some good social connection? Or, always just trying to steer back in the direction of those things, because, your mental health will thank you for it.
And I love your gentle approach to it, because for somebody who feels like their life is in disarray right now, they're like, okay, I don't really have any of these areas under control. It can be overwhelming, and that can lead to somebody not even getting started. So starting out, again, having that foundation and then picking away at little steps to build on it over time, I think is key to success.
Yeah, absolutely. And it often is quite surprising to people how much a small change can make a difference. It can really set you off with a sense of this is helping. Let's find the next thing and the next thing. But if you just start with something small that you could manage, like, I don't know, going to bed half an hour earlier or something, or adding one extra vegetable to every dish you eat, or, just like one small thing that you can achieve will give you that kind of step up to then add more in later. Don't be tempted to go for some, big grand gesture to yourself to begin with that you clearly can't sustain. It's all about those kind of small steps that compound over time.
Yeah, I agree. And let's take one of the examples you used there, going to sleep half an hour early. This is something we can all do, and it would have a profound effect on our well-being. But let's get into the nuances of forming a new habit, because somebody might agree this is something I want to adopt. Okay, I'm going to start doing it tonight. Maybe they're inspired after tuning into this. And I think people need to take that moment of inspiration to act and get that inertia going. But how do we help them through a week from now, 2 weeks from now, when they fall back into old patterns? So what I'm getting at here is, how do we form new habits in a way that they're going to stick?
So I would say from the very starting point, set your goals based on your own values and things that are really genuinely important to you. So, if you're struggling with your well-being, your mental health, for example, and so you're deciding, okay, I'm going to do this thing or maybe it's exercise or something because I know that's going to help my mental health, then write it down. Why am I setting this goal for myself? What are the reasons behind it? Why does it matter to me so much? Have, a really clear sense of what those things are. And how do I expect it's going to improve things for me? And, why am I going, if I achieve this and I continue this in my lifestyle for the next year when I look back on myself now and the choices I'm making now, what's going to make me proud of myself? What choices am I going to make that I'm going to look back on and say, I'm really glad I did that. I'm so proud of myself for getting through that. Really kind of breaking that down on pen and paper and sort of creating that vision for yourself. But then also recognizing that to establish a new habit, you can't rely on motivation. Motivation is a feeling that comes and goes like every other feeling. So you can't rely on it to be there every time that you need it. To develop a new habit is really about, your brain is incredible, right? So if you repeat a behavior enough times and frequently enough, your brain learns how to pretty much automate most of it for you so that you're not having to guess about whether, is this thing worth it? It's just something you do, like cleaning your teeth in the morning, right? You don't only do it on the days when you feel like it, you just do it because you always have. And so you don't have that sort of negotiation with yourself in your mind about, oh, shall I do that today? Can I be bothered? You just kind of start moving and you start working towards it. And it's fairly automated. It's just part of your habitual routine that you do. So that's the aim, is you want to add this thing into your lifestyle so that it's part of that habitual routine. But to get there, you have to go through this sort of pain barrier of it being full of effort and conscious effort at that. There will be lots of urges not to do it. You will start that sort of negotiation process in your own mind about, should I, shan't I, can I negotiate that today? Can I be bothered today? And so I think partly, recognizing that you have to get through that pain barrier. And there have been sort of research studies and things that say, this, 65 or 66 days mark that, if you can repeat a behavior for that many days, then it will become habitual. But I think that's, a research study. So I wouldn't hang your hopes on that number of days specifically. And then after then it will just be easy. It's recognizing that, do it for a few months and recognize that in those few months, it's going to be really tough. And after that, things will get easier because if you put it in part of your routine, it will be easier. I think when you put it into your routine as well, tag it onto something that you already do all the time, so that it kind of falls easily into your routine. Make it as easy as possible to do and as difficult as possible not to do. A lot of people talk about, for example, with the exercise thing, putting your kit and your trainers, by your bed so that's, you slip into them as you get out of bed and those kind of things, or whatever it is that works for you. There isn't that one golden rule that works for everybody. It's for working out what's my lifestyle, what is this one thing I want to add into it, and what's going to make it as easy as possible to get through that pain barrier period where I'm just not going to really feel like it and it's going to be full of effort. So on those days when you don't have that motivation and you're really struggling to think, oh, I don't really feel like it, there's other things I could be doing or need to be doing, it's coming back to all that stuff you wrote about why it's so important to you and why it's important to you to do it today and every day and maintain that consistency. So when you're really struggling, you can come back to that, which keeps you in touch with those goals and keeps you very close to them. And then you can sort of get through, but also having support along the way as well. If you have someone who's on board with those goals that has your own best interests at heart, then they can support you through the times when you might give up. That's often what happens in therapy, when people are working on something that's really difficult, like addiction, for example, having someone who's on your side and has your back and wants you to achieve your goals as much as you do, they can be that almost coaching voice to get you through the tough times that happen for everybody. We all have those periods where you just don't feel like it and you feel like giving up. So if you have someone in your life that you trust that can sort of be that accountability for you and help, support you through the tough times, then that helps too.
I want to highlight something you brought up a couple times, the pain barrier, because I think just understanding that when you're trying to form a new habit, there's going to be times that you don't feel like doing that thing. And what I want to ask you and get a little bit deeper into is, does that ebb and flow over time, or when that goes from being a conscious habit to a subconscious, does that generally diminish?
I think so. It's once you see that thing as non-negotiable, that it's just what we do, and partly that becomes partly that happens when you bring something into your sense of identity. So when this is just something I do now, this is who I am. I am someone who, we go back to the cleaning your teeth idea. I am someone who looks after my dental hygiene. So I just do this at the end of the night. Even if I'm really, really tired, I still clean my teeth. It's just what we do. And once you develop something as part of who you are, you don't see it as negotiable anymore. So you stop doing that little battle in your mind about, can I be bothered to do that tonight? Do I care enough? You do, because it's just what you've always done. So yeah, I think it does get easier, but there will be sort of, ebbs and flows of, sometimes it will, feel tough, or you might miss the the workout or whatever it is you're trying to add into your lifestyle. The trick is not to do it perfectly, or to expect yourself to do it perfectly, but to acknowledge that when you step off and you're not in line with your values and the goals, that you acknowledge that, you notice it, and you get back on as quickly as you can.
Let's go more into the perfection piece. I think this is a barrier for a lot of people when they're trying to adopt new habits, or just in general, trying to do things perfect and that getting in the way of moving forward. So somebody that's struggling with this, realizing, I'm focusing too much on the details, getting caught up, and that's holding me back. How do they go about reframing that in their mind?
Well, I think, it's so helpful to, I think lots of people think of perfectionism as someone who strives for success or strives for excellence. And you often hear that when people will say, oh, I'm such a perfectionist. And what they mean is, I do things really, really well. And they're sort of not the same. Being a perfectionist or going at something with perfectionism can absolutely be paralyzing, and it can stop you from even making decisions, let alone getting started, because the fear of failure, if you see, if you set yourself the standard of perfection all of the time, then it just stops you in your tracks, because the cost of not meeting perfection is too high. And so, if you are able to begin to work on your relationship with failure and see it for what it is, which is a part of a learning process and something that doesn't have to be attached to your self-worth or your sense of identity, then you're able to learn appropriately, because failing and making mistakes is learning. And so if you're able to acknowledge that, then you're able to progress. So essentially, if you are holding on to perfectionism, you're stopping yourself from progressing and learning and expanding your skills as far as they can potentially go. So it's kind of interesting that the idea of striving for perfection actually makes us do the opposite.
And you talk about in your book that it's human tendency to feel like everybody's looking at you, when as human beings, we tend to be really focused in on ourselves and critical of ourselves. So I think just keeping that in mind, as we can use any example, but if we're trying to put out a new TikTok video or record a podcast interview, realizing that people are mostly focused on themselves can relieve some of that pressure.
Yeah, absolutely. So I did a few videos on the spotlight effect, and it's a bias that we all have. So we all tend to overestimate the degree to which other people are judging us negatively. And the only time that we tend to get that right is when we are on stage performing, when actually people are, looking at us and judging us in that way. So, and I guess if you choose to get on stage, then there are other ways to sort of manage that idea that you are being scrutinized. But in day-to-day life, when we tend to assume, I don't know, if you're sat on a train or, walking down the street and you have that sense of worrying about, Do people think my outfit's terrible, or do people think I walk funny, or all of those things that just, those thoughts that just come through your head, and they just plague you as you're going along. And it's really, really helpful to recognize that most of the time we are overestimating how much that's happening. So most people are not even noticing you. They're focused on their own, most people are doing the same as you. So it can be so releasing. I think people with social anxiety as well tend to have an inward focus. So when we're socially anxious, we tend to be focused on, how am I coming across to other people? How are other people perceiving me? And that inward focus then leads to lots of sort of turmoil in terms of our anxious thoughts, because then we're focused on, oh gosh, how am I sitting? How am I standing? How am I talking? Am I getting it right? And that just triggers more and more anxiety. Whereas people who feel more confident socially tend to have an outward focus. So when we're feeling confident, we focus on our curiosity for other people, and such and such is at this party. I wonder how their holiday went. I need to go and find out if they had a nice time, or I really want to get to know that person. We haven't really had the chance to speak yet. And so you'll have that focus, that outward focus on other people and your curiosity for it. So often when we're working with people who are experiencing social anxiety, we'll sort of focus on trying to shift the perspective and shift that focus from one that's inward and focused on us internally to something that's outward, and focusing on some sort of task or curiosity for others that can replace that, because you can't do both at the same time.
Let's talk about how stress fits into that piece when it comes to social anxiety. Somebody gets stressed out when they're in a situation where they're interacting with others, say at a party or giving a speech. Let's talk about stress in two different ways: when it's a good thing, and then when it becomes a hindrance.
Sure. So yeah, stress can absolutely be a friend. And partly that comes with understanding how it works, that stress, that increased level of alertness that you notice when something happens. So let's say, I don't know, you have a meeting in the afternoon, and you've got half an hour. You could dash to the post office and post that parcel that needs to go out, and you've just got enough time. But you get there and there's a huge queue, and suddenly it's not going to fit into that time frame, and you get this sort of rush feeling through your body of and that's that increased level of alertness. Your stress response is allocating some resources to this so that you can be more alert, and you can then reprioritize if you need to. So you can make decisions about, is this the most important thing, or is getting back for this meeting on time the most important thing, that you might not be able to kind of think through clearly if you didn't have that extra level of alertness. If you're just chilling out in the queue there and didn't really think about what time you were getting back. So stress can be helpful if we then give something back to the system. So if we respond to stress that has helped us to perform, with the replenishment that we need. So, your brain is allocating resources, finite resources, to meet the demands of your environment. It just wants something back in return in the form of rest and replenishment, or nutrition, or social connection, all of those things that help. If we don't give something back to the system and rest and recuperate, then it's a bit like taking cash out of a bank account repeatedly without ever putting anything back in. At some point, you're going to be running on zero, and so you can't do it forever. And I guess when we recognize the body and the mind in that way, that this is a system that really helps. It's it helps you to perform at your best. It's your body, that sort of nervous feeling that you get, just before you speak in front of your colleagues at work, is your body preparing for you to be on your A game, for you to be ready to go and to be alert. But we have to be able to use the system properly and keep putting fuel back in order for it to work at its best for us. So this culture of, let's just work to the bone till we're exhausted, but then we'll go on a holiday at the end of the year. It's not how the body works. It's not how the brain is set up to work. And so, it's never going to be the most effective way of, with all the sort of work and popularity of conversations about being productive and being effective and being as focused as we can, the way that we are, dealing with our stress just doesn't match up to that. So what we're looking for is finding ways on the daily to rest and replenish in small ways, but manageable and sustainable ways, rather than, okay, I'm going to work till I'm burnt out and then I'm going to go on a retreat for a while and just recover and then come back to it. If you can find often those little sort of in-between moments of the day, so you might have 20 minutes between meetings, you could use that time to go and check your emails, which is going to re-trigger your stress response and just keep that going, make more demands on your system. Or you could use that 20 minutes to go for a walk or go and sit on the lawn and meditate. Or you could go and, sit in your car and recline the seat for 10 minutes and close your eyes and really rest deeply for just a few minutes. But it's something more than what you would get from checking your emails. So it's recognizing those small moments count and contribute to you managing your stress in a healthier way.
It's a really tricky time when it comes to that replenishing piece because we are always connected. If we're in the car, instead of laying, putting the seat back and having that rest, we can always check our phone. You mentioned checking email, social media, and especially in today's world, a lot of us with the pandemic have gone more to working at home and working from a distance and being connected. So I think it's so important to make sure you have those check and balances in place. And like you said, it's not about grinding, and then having this big break to make up for it. I think a good analogy is sleep, where it's not like you can go through your whole week and push and, cut out hours of sleep and then make up for it on weekends. You need to do that on a regular basis.
Yeah, it needs to be a part of the lifestyle. So, it just makes a huge difference to how people feel too. So, I guess I can sit here and kind of, tell people to do that all the time, but actually it's only through experience that you really get to feel the difference of how you feel. And I guess maybe like parents will get that with sleep. You never value sleep more than when you're a parent, because you realize how terrible you can feel when you have not had enough sleep for days, weeks, or months at a time. And so that can kind of often teach people at a certain stage in their life to really prioritize sleep, because they can see how much of an effect it has on the rest of their health. So I think sometimes you have to do these things by trying things out and experiencing them. If you learn from your own experience, then you become your own expert at what works for you.
I'm glad you highlighted the ebbs and flows. Like when you have kids, there's times that you need to, come at a balance, knowing that this is a temporary thing. And what this perked in my mind is talking about a few years ago when you went from being a psychologist in practice, and I know you still work with patients a little bit, but when you decided to go online and start posting your videos on TikTok, is that one of these examples where I can imagine, you must have been burning the candle at both ends and things probably went out of balance, but I'd love to hear more of what that time was like for you.
Yeah, they absolutely did. And it was, so I was working in a very small private practice. I was only seeing, a few clients, so managing it around the family and stuff. It was all very balanced and great. And then I had this idea to share some of the educational stuff that often is, hidden inside the therapy room and that people in therapy find very helpful. But I thought, everyone can find this helpful. I find this helpful. Let's make it more available. So I wanted to make these videos and put them online. And the short form video platforms like TikTok and Reels on Instagram and things were just this incredible way to reach lots of people. And I started to make these videos, and they started to just really fly, and they were getting loads of views, and the messages that were coming back every day were almost overwhelming. And people saying, "Wow, this is really helpful. Thank you. I'm doing this with my family, and it's what should we do next, or what's the next video coming?" And so the feedback that we were getting was just incredible, and it sort of spurred us on to keep going. And so I didn't want it to impact the family negatively, because we had this sort of balance and stuff. And so I was trying to, get up super early in the morning to film rather, or late at night once I'd put the children to bed, and so that inevitably disrupted my my sleep patterns and that kind of thing. And then once we were in lockdown as well during the pandemic, of course the children were at home, and it was just it wasn't sustainable, but we always saw it as temporary. So we saw it as this project that we would do for a while, and then it would at some point just stop. That people would just stop finding it interesting, and then we'd kind of shut it all down, and it would just be that cool thing that we did. But it has just carried on, and we told ourselves that all the while that people are finding it helpful, we will continue. But because it carried on, inevitably we had to then find a more sustainable pattern and lifestyle that we could manage over the long term. And we're getting there. It's never perfect. I never want to give anyone the impression that we are getting it perfect, or that because I know all these things from therapy that I must have this kind of problem-free life. It just doesn't work like that. I think what it gives you is this arsenal of tools to use when life throws things at you. And that's really what it has done, because we found ourselves with an unsustainable lifestyle because we thought we were taking on this project temporarily, and it just got huge and out of control. And so I then used the tools. So I had to have these kind of values check-ins in the book where you just get a bird's eye view on your life for a minute. So you pen to paper, looking at the different areas of your life. What's most important to me right now? What matters to me most? And am I living in line with that? So I do those on a fairly regular basis where I just look at, okay, what matters most? And where am I not living in line with those values? And so then that gives me an opportunity to say, okay, how can I turn back in that direction? How can I start living more in line with that today, tomorrow, the next day? And that enabled me to recognize, okay, I'm not okay with the balance as it is, so I need to shift this way, or I need to shift that way, or I need to, spend more time with friends or with my children or exercising or whatever it is. And so I'm always kind of adjusting the balance, because things pull you off in a different direction, right? Sometimes there will be a great opportunity and it means it demands work for, a period of time that isn't really how much work you'd like to be doing normally. And then, you can pull away from it. And I think it's important for us to see that, because often people will just criticize themselves when things are out of balance. They see it as something they're getting wrong, and they're not getting it right, and everybody else is. And it's just not that way. I think it's always seeing it as a balancing act, that life is pulling you this way and that way. As long as you're noticing that you're being pulled in a certain direction, and then you pull back towards your values in a conscious way, then that's the journey, right?
And you mentioned the values being something you turned to when you were going through that time of transition and things were busy and unbalanced. Was this a tool that you brought in at that time, or something you'd been doing prior and went back to when you were, really, really busy?
Yeah, so it's exercises that are often done in a therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy, which is very values based. So it's looking at taking committed action towards the things that matter most to you, even in the face of struggle and difficulty. And it's always been an aspect of therapy that everybody seems to find it kind of illuminating and helpful in terms of just helping you to shift direction. And so, I kind of felt, well, if it's helpful in therapy, why don't we use it more of the time in just everyday life? And because values change over time, right? Depending on, the stage of life you're at, or what you're focused on, or what career you've taken on, what's most important to you at any given time can change. So, we talk about becoming a parent, then your values kind of flip inside out overnight. And so it's always good to just check in. And even if your values haven't changed necessarily from the last time you did the exercise, you can still look at, am I still living in line with them as much as I would like to be? Or have I been pulled in a different direction? And if I have, what can I do to shift back to where I want to be? So it's really good for just giving you that little bird's eye view of your life and seeing, if you're traveling in the direction you want to be going.
Yeah, no, it's great. Let's get into the nitty gritty of what that looks like, though. How many different values is somebody supposed to come up with? Do they rate them down? And what are some examples of different values people might want to include?
Well, there are different kind of worksheets and things that are available online, but I do it in the kind of simplest of ways, where I get pen and paper, I split it into different boxes, and I'll have like a box for parenting, a box for family relationships, friendships, intimate relationships, creativity, health, lifelong learning, contribution, as in contribution to community and the world at large, and I'll just, in each of those boxes, just think of, sometimes it's a single word, sometimes it's a sentence or a few points about, it's not what I want to happen to me, it's the kind of person I want to be in that area of my life. So how do I want to show up in my marriage, or as a parent, or with my colleagues? And so even in the face of troubled times in a certain area of your life, it's how do I want to come at that difficulty or that trouble? How do I want to face it? And so, sometimes it's an attitude or some sort of value statement or a word. Like, in my sort of trying to think now, in my work box and my sort of lifelong learning, I always seem to come up with the word enthusiasm. That always seems to kind of stick for me, and curiosity. So those are words that I kind of keep close to my heart, if you see what I mean, and I always try and ask myself if I'm living in line with those. If I want to embrace everything with a degree of enthusiasm. And so you get all those words down in the different boxes, and you can do this really simple rating where you just say, okay, scale of 0 to 10, how important are these things to me, these values in this area of my life? And 0, not at all, 10 is the most important thing. So you rate how important they are, and then you do the same rating again, but this time how closely you feel that you're living in line with those values at the moment. So this week, 0, not at all, 10, yes, perfectly. And again, it's not to be critical and say, oh, I'm not doing this well enough. It's an indication of, am I going in the right direction, or do I need to shift direction? Because I see values, that's probably an important distinction, is a goal is something you can achieve and then it's done, right? Your goal is to pass your exam. Once you've passed it, you've done it, it's complete. A value is more like a lifelong path that you always try to stay close to. So you never complete it. But life sort of pulls you away from that path sometimes. And sometimes you're too far away from it, and things start to feel uncomfortable and you want to come back towards it. So you might, so your goals might be to do your exams, pass your exams, because your value might be to always continue learning new skills. And that is the new skill that you're learning at the moment. So, it's always, the goals are sort of smaller than the value. And that's why I said before, we were talking about, motivation and trying new things, is stay really closely connected to the reason that you set the goal in the first place, which is your values. Why do I want to get fit? Well, maybe living a long, healthy life is one of the most important things to me. And so if I recognize that, I can see that even when I don't feel like it, I need to, get up and go for my run or whatever that thing is.
Great breakdown. I think it's important we separate goals versus values. And I could see how it'd be a really great practical exercise to do the values first and then take those values and come up with our goals. Because we're going to know where we want to spend, where we're going to want to accomplish things by the values. And then we can get more nuanced. And again, like you mentioned, goals are things that we can eventually check off and then move on and create new goals.
Yeah, sure. So if you start with the values, and from that you can see which direction you need to go in, then the goals feel more sort of organic and true to the things that matter most to you. And it's one way of checking out your goals as well, and seeing if the goals you've set for yourself are based on other people's opinions, or what other people think you should be doing, or what you think you should be doing because you need to manage other people's opinions of you. And so it's a great way to just kind of check in on yourself and see if things are going in the direction you want them to. Because often, people will come to therapy sometimes and they'll not really know what the problem is, but they just know that things don't feel right and everything feels like a struggle. And so often those sorts of situations are when someone has become detached or been pulled away from the things that matter most to them, just because that happens in life, right? Life will take you away from things that matter to you, and if we're not in touch with that, then that can happen to such a degree that it starts to make us really unhappy.
You touched on something there and continued into it here, something we should go deeper into, and that's assessing how true to ourselves we're being. The values exercise is obviously going to be fitting under that, but for somebody that's been living a certain life and living under conditioning that they've had there since they were kids, how do they go about uncovering who they really are?
I think doing exercises like this are really good, but also through experience and listening to the feelings that you get. If I don't know, if you, let's say you start on a certain career because, I don't know, your parents always wanted you to be a doctor, and then when you're in that career, you just loathe it, and it's, and you find yourself desperate to get home in the evening so you can do this other thing that is your absolute passion and interest. Then it doesn't necessarily mean quit your job and go and do that thing. It means listen to those feelings. You start to trust your own judgment, and if you're not sure, you're going to a therapist and talking about those things, or talking to a friend that you trust, or if you're not a talker, starting to journal about it and write it down. Getting clarity on these things is the only way forward. And we never truly know if we're doing the right thing or going in the right direction. But if we always keep tabs on how we feel about it and our vision of how we want to be living our lives and the kind of person we want to be, then we're in a better place. It's like having a map and a light to help us sort of navigate through, rather than kind of not being able to see anything.
As we opened up, we talked about the different pillars, and most of them were self-explanatory. You mentioned routine being one, and again, that is self-explanatory, but let's get into the nuances of what that means. How much of our life should be, scheduled and following a certain pattern, and then how much room should we leave in for spontaneity?
Yeah, I think people are a bit different on this. I mean, we definitely require both, right? That we need a sense of routine, and if you mess around with routine, specifically, our kind of circadian rhythms and our need to, sleep when it's dark and be awake when it's light, and those kind of things, that can be really disruptive. So we have that need for routine. We have that need for a degree of predictability because it makes us feel safe, right? We know that certain things will happen at certain times, and so we can predict that and work around it and meet our needs. If everything's completely chaotic and we don't have that, then we're going to live in stress all of the time. So, we need routine and predictability and safety. But if everything is predictable, we quickly get bored, right? We need adventure, we need change, we need things to work on and try out and risks to take. And I think each person has their own needs around that. There isn't a kind of, spend this many hours on something that feels safe and this many hours on, doing something wild, or, it's really different for everybody, depending on what you want for your life and what you want your life to look like. But I would say for those people who have that tendency to always go for safety, which lots of us do because we're human, and the urge is to make ourselves feel safe. If we are always making choices based on, if we avoid doing something based on fear, then life tends to shrink. So you've got these kind of different layers of your life. And if something starts to feel uncomfortable and anxiety provoking, and so we kind of block it out and we say, I'm not going to do that anymore, I'm going to avoid it, we find that then the next layer of, the next sort of outside layer of our comfort zone also becomes uncomfortable. And so we decide to block that out and avoid that. And if you keep doing that with each layer of your life shrinks, right? And before you know it, there's many less layers to your life and less things that you do or feel that you're able to do. So, there always has to be that kind of outer rim of your comfort zone that always challenges you. It's always there, but the more you avoid because of anxiety, the closer it gets to you, and then the more restricted you become. So, I would say always kind of challenge it, but don't feel that you have to be always under stress and pressure and always doing that thing that feels scary. Do as much as you can, but also remembering how the stress response works. Get back into that comfort zone, rest and replenish so that you can go again.
Let's go even deeper into this and talk about somebody that has been blocking a lot of those thoughts and feelings that come up. They're an anxious type person, and maybe that's worked for them in the short term, but they're finding their world getting smaller and smaller. And for them, it feels overwhelming to dig in and feel the different emotions and let the thoughts come in, because that's not something that they're used to. How do they get in there and begin to unravel that in a healthy way?
So if someone's been sort of, blocking painful emotions, it's really, really difficult to suddenly just say, oh, I'm going to let it all in now and I'm going to feel it all, because the reason you've been blocking it out is because you haven't yet been taught the skills to manage painful emotion. And so you don't know what to do with it. And then it starts to feel, for a lot of people, unsafe, because it's so overwhelming when we feel that painful emotion that we will do absolutely anything to just make it go away now. Which is when we kind of, do the things that are unhelpful to us, things like alcohol or drugs or whatever those things are, that then, get us into terrible cycles. So if you were working on something like that in therapy, what would happen is, the therapist wouldn't expect you to go there and be in that painful place without first gearing you up with the skills to manage it. So you want to, build up that arsenal of tools that helps you to get through. So, for example, in a therapy called DBT, dialectical behavior therapy, people are taught distress tolerance skills. Okay, so you have skills that are called emotion regulation skills, which are the skills that help you to prevent some of those really big spikes in emotional arousal. And you also have distress tolerance. So when you haven't managed to prevent something, lots is going on for you and you find yourself overwhelmed with emotions, so the emotion is very, very intense, then there are certain skills you can do to help you get through safely. When it's just about surviving, getting through, and enabling you to bring it back down sooner than it otherwise would have done. And those things generally are not rocket science, but they're difficult to put in place when you're distressed, if you haven't pre-prepared them. So I did a video quite a long time ago on self-soothing boxes, which is one of the distress tolerance skills that's taught in DBT, and this idea that you sort of pre-prepare for really difficult times when you're going to experience painful emotion. And you can literally use a shoebox and you put things into that shoebox that are going to help you through. So you use all of your senses with tolerating distress. Use all of your senses to ground yourself in the here and now, to soothe your way through. So things that you find you associate with safety and comfort, so that you're as comfortable as you can be while that painful emotion takes its natural course and dies down, so that you're not tempted to kind of push it out. So those things might be carefully chosen music. It might be a soundtrack that you have pre-prepared, that things that help you to feel safe or soothed. It might be the phone number for your dearest, most trusted friend that always says the right things and helps you get through. Or it might be, it could be anything. Perfume is a great one, actually. So a sense of smell is one of the quickest acting ways to kind of soothe that system. So I've had people before actually use like lavender, and they'll put it into you can get these little key rings that are like little cuddly toys, and you kind of unpick it, take the stuffing out, fill it with lavender or something else a scent that you associate with safety and calm, and then you sew it back up again, and it's on your keys. So whenever you're struggling, you can kind of, take in that scent, and it will help you to kind of soothe the system when you need to. But generally in a self-soothing box, all of those things are anything that's going to help you through that really difficult moment. And mindfulness is a big part of the distress tolerance skills. So it's being aware of what's going on so that you can make the right choices. But generally that's a skill that you learn and practice before you're in that place. So all of the distress tolerance skills are something that you learn and practice in therapy before you then go into talking about the really painful stuff.
So when it comes to self-soothing in that box and the different examples you gave there, this is something you'd only use when things get really escalated as a coping mechanism to kind of bring things back into a more neutral zone so you can do the deeper work.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have the skills to manage through the painful emotion, then you don't need to fear it quite as much as if in times when you don't have those skills to manage. So it's all about increasing your ability to cope with it and get through it in a safe way, rather than just going there and hoping it goes okay. It's pre-preparing, I think.
What's science showing us about emotions and thoughts? I think it's important we get to the nitty gritty, the 101 on what these are, because at the time when they become overwhelming, they can feel very hard to control and not know how to handle. But if we understand what they really are, I think that'd be helpful for all of us.
I think one of the biggest things that you learn in therapy is that emotions aren't who you are. They're not your personality or your identity. They're an experience. And every human being has emotional experience. And experiences wash over us like waves. So one of the sort of lovely metaphors I love in therapy about sort of blocking out emotion is that imagine if you were stood in the ocean up to kind of waist height and the waves are sort of coming towards you. If you try to block those waves from hitting the shore and you try to hold them back in any way, you can't do it. You're just going to take a tumble, right? And you will become, you'll kind of put your arms out and you'll become overwhelmed by a wave that's more powerful, and you can't stop it from doing its work. But if you accept that those waves are going to come along and wash over you, then you do something slightly different, right? You change your stance, you brace yourself, you might bend your knees so that you're ready to, you might be swept off your feet for a moment, but you're going to be ready to come back down again and land on your feet. And so you're much better positioned to be able to deal with each wave, so that when you do come back down, you're ready for the next one too. And it's a bit like that with kind of emotional experience. If you see it as something that's washing over you and you accept that it's going to do that, as soon as you allow it to be there, and even, this sounds radical, but even welcoming it, then it takes some of the power out of it. It takes its natural course and it washes past. And so there's actually real power in deciding, I'm going to allow this feeling to be here, because often once we stop fighting it, it's going to wash over us. It's happening throughout our body, and it's a physical sensation as much as anything else, that we often then conceptualize in our minds about what that means and whether we can deal with it or not. But emotions are also information. So emotions aren't good or bad. They are ideas offered up to you from your brain. So your brain is always taking in information from the outside world about what's going on and what that means for you. And it only has so much information to go on, right? It only has your senses about what's going on around you. And from that, it has to come up with some ideas that are useful to you. And part of your brain's way of communicating to you is through emotional experience. So you'll feel this thing. So for example, anxiety, if you feel a rush of anxiety, that's meant to be uncomfortable because it's supposed to be activating. It's supposed to tell you, you get out of here now, you're not safe, or you fight this thing off, you're under threat. And so that works. That's really useful if we see that emotion as a useful signal that we can listen to. But also if we see it for what it is, which is one idea of this situation. So if I acknowledge that I feel anxious in the situation, but there's also another part of me that can see other perspectives, which is, I could be safe in this situation, or I am safe because X, Y, and Z, then we're able to kind of make our own decisions. So you can experience that wash of emotion as an experience, not who I am. It doesn't mean I'm unable to cope. It's just a wash of anxiety. And then I'm going to choose what to do with it. And kind of stepping back from emotion in that way and seeing it as an experience that can be useful, because emotion always has something to say about what I'm experiencing right now. And I get to choose whether I listen to that or not, is really empowering. It really sort of shifts your relationship with all human experience.
And I think another important thing to deflate a lot of the power of quote unquote negative emotions or thoughts is realizing that they are part of the human experience. And if you weren't having them, that wouldn't even be possible. So you're just having a human experience. So normalizing this and talking openly about this, I think gives people a lot of power just in that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because, when you meet people who don't experience lots of emotion, for example, when people imagine that depression is all about sadness, lots of people experience depression where they feel numb and they struggle to feel anything at all. And it's awful. It's a terrible place to be when you're sort of numb to everything and struggling to feel. That's not a pleasant place to be. And often when we're overwhelmed with emotion, then we sort of almost fantasize about making it all go away. And actually making it all go away is just as awful. And then people ping pong. So we kind of, we're overwhelmed with emotion. So we do something radical to make it all disappear, some of those unhealthy behaviors. And then when it does all disappear, we realize how awful that can be. And then we go back, and we just we end up really out of balance. Whereas if we allow it to be there as part of experience, but also engage our sort of our rational mind and our ability to think in different ways, then we can create a bit more of a sort of balanced experience.
You gave us that great analogy of a wave and got deep into emotions and describing all that. But what about ruminating thoughts? Getting specific on this. If somebody is continually thinking negative thoughts, whether they're the same thoughts or different thoughts, how do they go about dealing with that and getting out of that?
So, rumination is one of, it's really something to take seriously and tackle. Rumination is that thoughts washing machine, right? It's you have it might just be one or two or three really negative or self-loathing thoughts or thoughts about, past experiences that are painful. And they just churn over and over again, and you go over those same things. So it just goes round and round and round. And rumination is one of the big factors in maintaining depression. So, if you're depressed, you get the urge to kind of shut the world out and just spend time thinking about stuff. And when you do that, you just create more time and space for you to feel worse because you're thinking about those things that make you feel worse. So rumination is something that if you notice it's to take it seriously. But I guess the first battle or the first challenge is to notice it, because part of the struggle when you're, not even when you're depressed, but, any time that you might be ruminating, is that your mind is elsewhere. Mostly your mind is in the past. And when you're off in the past, you're not present noticing that your mind has gone off. And that's where mindfulness becomes just an incredible skill, to be able to notice where your mind has gone to, what the effect is that that's having on you, and then choosing to bring your attention back to something in the here and now. And that's essentially mindfulness. People imagine that when you're being mindful, you have to be ultimately focused on the present and you can't be distracted. And actually, if you're getting distracted, you're then not doing it right. And it's not really true. Mindfulness is the practice of noticing where your mind has gone and bringing it back again. And that's where it becomes such a valuable tool for tackling rumination. Because if you can just for those few seconds notice, I'm really, really churning over this old memory and I know where it's going to take me, then you open this window of opportunity to decide, I'm going to come back to the present. I'm going to do something to ground me in the here and now. And every time my mind goes off to that past thing, I'm going to bring it back. I'm going to bring it back. But also, I guess, if there is rumination going on about a specific time or a specific event, that it's not necessarily to block that out. It's to notice, maybe there's something there that I need to think about, but we need to think about it in a constructive and productive way that's going to help us resolve it in some way or heal that thing in some way. Churning it over doesn't do that. Sitting down and going through it in a more structured way, for example, with a therapist, is going to be more helpful in dealing with it. So it's saying, okay, this thing keeps coming to my mind. I'm going to write it down, or I'm going to, commit that I'm going to go and talk about it in a productive way so that I'm free to bring myself back to the present when I need to be present. Because rumination is just a huge problem.
One thing I'm becoming really aware of as we converse here is the fact that the body doesn't make mistakes with these things. You're talking about the ruminating thoughts, and you've alluded to this before too, the fact that these are signals that we should investigate. So if we have that mind shift and we know the proper ways of going in or working with somebody to go in, we can then use these as tools, a compass basically, to know where we need to do the work and where we need to look.
Yeah. And I had someone recently, a mathematician here in England, called Hannah Fry. She's brilliant. And she said she had sort of realized through a bout of illness that life was not a problem to be solved. It was an experience to be had. And that's a great way of looking at all of human experience, the ups and downs, the struggles, and certainly as people work through things in therapy, that if we step back and see that it's all an experience, that our main purpose is not to be happy all the time and be okay with everything and live a perfect life. This is the experience of life, is working our way through. If we do that with curiosity and we see, wow, this time has been really painful for me, and this is what I've learned from that, or, when I spend time doing this, or when my lifestyle is more like this, I feel X, Y, or Z, and I feel different. And it's always looking at everything with curiosity, and the whole thing is one big learning experience. And there's something so empowering and freeing when we look at it like that, that we don't have to battle it anymore. It's not something we're getting wrong. It's just this incredible, complicated journey that we're working through. And how incredible that we get to learn along the way so that we can adjust and improve things as we go.
Something you really address in the book is the journey's end, talking about death. And I think this is an important thing for people to think about. It's something that comes up on the show quite often. And again, as I always say when this comes up, not in a morbid way, but looking at this as a tool to make a more meaningful experience in the present. So I'd love for you to share how you go about looking at that in your own life and then when you're working with other people.
Yeah, so this is an area that I sort of, once I decided to include it in the book, sort of did a bit of a deep dive and was reading some incredible stuff on death that you just, you don't realize is there until you start looking for it. And I guess people don't generally look for that stuff because it's something that we don't talk about, right? It's that one thing that is inevitable for all of us, and yet so many of us struggle to have conversation about it. It's the sort of the fear that we all have to deal with. It's certain we will all die at some point, but it's also filled with uncertainty because nobody really most people don't know how or when, or when they're going to die, and so there's that sort of uncertainty around it, and the fear and the dread and the horror of and all the what ifs that come along. So it's all that we're all dealing with this in our own ways, and because of, I think, that sort of huge uncertainty around death, it makes it really difficult for people to talk about, because we want to feel safe, we want to feel secure, and there's no way of doing that. But some of the, I've probably got it behind me, I don't want to turn around because I'll be away from my mic, but there was a great book that I sort of dived into when I was reading about this, and there's this idea that maybe the fact that we know we are all going to die at some point, while it's super scary, maybe that could also be a foundation for a meaningful life. That if we're not here forever, what are we going to do with our time? And how are we going to make that meaningful in some way? And so rather than sort of trying not to think about or not talk about or acknowledge this thing that happens to everybody, how do we add it into our idea of a meaningful life, that we don't know when we will go, but we have to live as if that we have a future for it to be meaningful. So it's this whole sort of balancing act that, it's fascinating when you go into it, because it can be really sort of life enhancing, I think, in terms of helping us to access gratitude. That once we realize, this is it. This is the time is now. This is our time. When then it can really help you to sort of access what is most meaningful to me right now, what matters most, and what am I going to do about that?
Somewhere along the journey of the podcast, it was something that I delved into more and more with guests. And for me, it's been probably the last couple of years or so that I've gone deeper into thinking about that on a regular basis. And for me, it just helps me not sweat the small stuff, brings me to the present moment, and just lets me really enjoy whatever is right in front of me.
Yeah. Me too. I think doing the research for the book into that sort of stuff really was beneficial for me personally, and I think I feel the same. That it helps you to shift that perspective. It's a bit like online. I mean, this isn't really a therapy thing, but online you get those images of Earth from space and from really far away and stuff, and they always give you that little kind of sense of, it triggers awe, doesn't it? And it triggers that sense of, wow, I feel small or insignificant, or there will be no trace of me one day. And there's something quite empowering about that, these things matter, but also they will end. And so how do I make them matter now? And how do I enjoy the ride and, do what matters most to me? And stop sweating small stuff, as you say. Like, how do I kind of let go of these things that are making my life more difficult and troubling me, but are not essential?
And I think it ties back to the perfectionism we talked about earlier. People that are, again, caught up in the small stuff and worrying about things that in the big scheme of things don't really matter. And again, when it comes to this and anything in the health and wellness realm, mental health, physical health, there's a balance. You don't want to be somebody that sits and spends hours each day thinking about this, but coming in and thinking about it periodically in a healthy way, I think can be really powerful for a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so too. It's something to sort of balance out, and because often, these things can show up if we're living with a sort of fear of death, but we're not allowing ourselves to go there and talk about that. It can show up in other ways. When lots of people are struggling, especially post-pandemic, lots of people are struggling with health anxiety, and often those things can be around fear of death, and where you have anxiety about something, and maybe you go to therapy and it gets better for a while, and then this new anxiety pops up somewhere else, and it's sort of a different scenario, but they all link to the same theme. And often that's when, starting to uncover maybe, fears around death in therapy and working through those can be really helpful.
One thing you really hammer home in the book is the importance of human connection. And I think in today's society, a lot of us can be guilty of putting that aside. I'll make those connections later, or spend time with loved ones later because I'm busy and there's a lot in front of me, and yada, yada, yada. But let's get into how important that is, especially for somebody who is suffering mentally.
Social connection is everything. I mean, I put it into those 5 basics, those 5 foundations of good mental health. And because before, when I first qualified, and we would talk about these things in sort of supervision and stuff, and we called it the solid back 4, your 4 defense players. And it was, the diet, routine, sleep, and exercise. But I've since then decided, no, it has to be the 5. It has to be 5. It has to be social connection as well, because we cannot function in an effective way and in a healthy way without it. It's how we're built. We're built to live in groups, and there's been lots of research over the years that have come out demonstrating that, and that it's healthy relationships, good quality relationships, not lots of them, but good quality social connections. It will help you to live longer, healthier, happier lives. So I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, and everybody was going on to, Zoom calls and stuff, and working from home, and saying, I don't think we'll ever go back to normal. We realize we don't have to go in and see each other in person, and this is great. And then a few months in, everyone's desperate to go and see someone in the flesh and, look into someone's eyes for real again. And I think we sort of almost learnt that one the hard way, that we need each other and we need to have good quality human connections between each other. It's just how we're built.
And what do you think that is? Is it the vulnerability of connecting in person and sharing stories and sharing thoughts and feelings? What is it about those interactions, especially in person, that are so helpful?
That's a good question. I mean, I guess it goes back to when you sort of go back to things like evolutionary psychology, that, we have always lived and thrived in groups and communities, and being alone generally meant the end. And it was a big survival issue if you were cast out from your community. So we became good at nurturing each other, making ourselves useful, helping each other, cooperating, collaborating, and learning from each other through things like story telling. And it's just a fundamental part of our survival, and so we have to keep nurturing that. We're no different now. We still need that. And so it helps, and it changes the way we even deal with stress. Good quality human connection helps you to deal with stress and rest and replenish. It nurtures us, but it's really important to remember that it's less about how many followers you've got on Instagram or how many people you have on Facebook. It's much more about when you get home from work in the evening, do you look into your partner's eyes and have a conversation and nurture each other and listen to each other and help each other through things? And those are the types of relationships that we thrive on, not, likes or anything else like that.
And for whatever reason, it seems like those things can be the hardest to form habits around, whether it comes to sleep or meditating or forming those social connections. The more subjective, soft things versus, this is the diet I need to eat, these are the supplements I need to take. Do you have any insight on why that is?
Yeah, and there's something very individualistic about that, isn't there? That it's all about me and competing with the world and being super productive and proving my worth through some sort of, wealth or career success, and then everything will be okay. Whereas actually, we're sort of preaching the wrong things to people if that's the message they're getting. That you will be most satisfied in life if you focus on being only the absolute best you can be to the detriment of potentially the people around you. And you've only got to hear a few sort of handful of stories from people who have been some of the most successful people in the world, career-wise, but have been unhappy and then decided to make more time for friends and family and radically changed how they feel. But I guess sometimes we have to learn that from experience.
Let's come back to the mindfulness piece. When you're talking mindfulness, are you talking about a meditation practice or just being in the more in the present moment as you're having your day-to-day interactions, or both?
Both. I think mindfulness can be done in the everyday, but it's a bit like, I think mindfulness practice is a bit like the driving lesson. It's the formal practice that enables you to build those skills when it's easier. So if you protect some time and space to focus your mind, then you can practice it. Whereas if you're trying to do that on the run, when you haven't really had the practice, you're probably going to get distracted. Undoubtedly, you're going to get distracted and you'll be off. So I think having that sort of protected time to put in the practice as like a mind gym, if you like, it's like the driving lesson. It's the time when you can hone those skills, because inevitably it's in real life when you're going to really, really need them. And so that's when the practice comes into its own, because you'll be more able to use the skills that mindfulness enables you to kind of help the situation.
Earlier, when you talked about mindfulness and having that space between when an emotion comes up or a thought comes up and then the action, Let's get more into the specifics there. When you create that space by being more mindful or having a meditation practice, which is going to give you hopefully more mindfulness throughout your day, what do we do with that extra space specifically?
Yeah, so it opens up this window between sort of urgent action. So you'll in any given moment you'll experience some sort of emotional state or like a physical sensation, maybe. Different people notice different aspects of their experience, and with those sensations, you might have an urge to act. And most people will experience that urge as part of the sensations and act straight away. So we kind of, it's almost like weaves in a basket. We don't experience each weave, we experience the basket as a whole. And so when we're not aware, we just have this sensation, then we act, and then it's all done. And then we go, why do I keep doing the same things over and over? And it's really not helping me. So mindfulness slows that process down. So you begin to notice the urge, and then you also notice that you don't have to act on it, that you can choose whether you go with it or whether you don't. So sometimes in mindfulness practice, for example, in therapy, people will do mindfulness of eating. So they'll like hold a raisin or something in their hand, and then they'll kind of place it on the tongue and hold it in the mouth, but resist the urge to do anything else with it, and just hold that there and experience the sensations of it. And those sorts of kind of small exercises just open up your mind to experience, okay, I can notice a sensation, I can notice an urge, and then I can choose whether or not I go with that or whether I do something different. And just by practicing in those small ways, it enables you to then do that when you most need it. So when you have an urge to do something strongly that's not going to help you in whatever your goal or life choices are, then you're more able to choose to act opposite to that urge and go with what's important to you rather than how you're feeling right now.
That makes sense. And there's a lot of talk these days in the health and wellness space about the mind-body connection. I'm curious how you go about thinking about that.
Yeah, I guess over the years, I've gradually come to see it as one whole. Like I talk about the weaves in the basket thing. I think we experience it as a basket, and there are different ways that you can, sort of tease things out of that. You can measure something in the body, measure something in the mind, or all those kind of things. But essentially, they are part of the same whole. They are part of the same basket, and so you, while it can be useful to separate them when you're trying to think about, okay, what was my bodily sensation when I experienced that? And what does that mean when, certain thoughts are coming into my mind? And you can split it off in order to help you understand the way out of something. But they are part of the whole. You cannot separate your mental health from your physical health. They influence each other all of the time, back and forth. And so, if you're physically unwell, for example, that will influence your emotional state and how you feel in your mind. And equally, if your mind is not in its best place, your physical health will suffer too. So I think we have to. I think we're moving in the right direction because we're kind of closing that gap and seeing them as one big system. But yeah, I think we're moving in the right direction with that.
And given that connection there, for somebody who is feeling really low and they're looking for that entry point to get inertia going their way, how do you recommend them get started? Is it with body techniques, if that is more feasible for them, or mind techniques, or a combo of both?
Yeah, both. I think sometimes the quickest way to impact the mind is through the body. So, for example, if I'm working with someone who has anxiety, for example, and they'll often, these things take time to work on, but often people will say, what's the quickest thing I can do to work on it between now and next week? And on those types of things will always be, okay, let's do some breathing exercises. Let's show you how you can bring down the level of intensity of that anxiety with just your breath really, really quickly. And so those sorts of things can be really, really powerful. And so they're often the first things to start with. And often because those things can bring us to a level where we're more able to do the more complex stuff. So if someone has low mood, for example, we'll often work on what we call behavioral activation to start with. So we'll try and get that person moving, get them out, get them experiencing daylight and moving their body and doing things. And just doing that, those things, physically changing in your body and, staying hydrated and sleeping and those sorts of physical things, they will then lift that person's mood to a level where they're more able to work on the other stuff. So, the sort of working on your thought patterns and understanding those, that's much more easy to do when you've kind of lifted yourself to a certain level by adding in some exercise and making sure you eat and getting enough sleep and those sorts of things. So I think you would start with the sort of physical stuff and then add in the other stuff after.
That makes sense. Come back to the breathing. If somebody is going through a period where they're suffering from panic or anxiety and they want to come back down into that baseline mode so they can really work on things, what does that breath look like?
So it's all about slowing that breath down, because often when you're panicked or you're anxious, your breathing gets very fast and very shallow. So it's a bit of a like that. And when you do that, you are fueling that anxiety response. And you cannot continue to escalate that. Your body cannot escalate that anxiety response without you continuing to breathe like that. So if you start to breathe slowly and more deeply, you're going to kind of, in time, slow your heart rate down. So generally, I would say, breathe in, and you can also do a kind of second breath as well, which Dr. Huberman is great for recommending. So he does breathe in and then add another little breath after, and then you do one long out breath. So you're elongating that out breath and trying to breathe out for longer than you breathe in. So in therapy, we do things like the 7-11, where you kind of breathe in for 7 and out for 11. But the numbers itself don't really matter so much as do what is comfortable for you. Play around with it. Some people might feel dizzy with 7-11 and other people need it to be different. So it's focusing on, yes, you're doing your sort of deep breath in, but making sure you breathe out for longer and repeating that as well. It's not with the one breath. It's, give yourself a couple of minutes. You will notice the difference. I use it all the time. If I'm doing anything that feels high pressured or that I feel nervous about, I only have to do that for a few seconds, and it brings me down to just a sort of level where I can then refocus on what I'm doing. And nobody even needs to know you're doing it. Nobody can see you doing that. So it's such a great skill for you just managing in the big wide world when you're under pressure.
It's powerful. It's free. We take it everywhere. And again, you can do it without people knowing. It's awesome.
It's sort of confidence in your pocket, really, isn't it? If you know you can manage and deal with and bring down the intensity of difficult emotions, then it's brilliant.
Let's talk more about confidence. You shared a really cool video today on your Instagram talking about vulnerability and confidence. And it was a video with 2 different balloons showing the connection between the two. So for somebody who's feeling like their confidence is lacking right now, how do they begin to build that up?
Yeah, so the video was all about sort of growing your confidence, because I think most people have, an area of their life, however small that area is, where they feel confident. And then, if you stay in that area where you feel confident, that situation, maybe that situation is in your own home. You only feel confident at home, and in the outside world, you struggle more. If you stay in the area where you feel confident, you'll feel great right now, but your confidence won't be able to grow. The only way you can grow your confidence is by stepping outside of that into places where you feel vulnerable, and if there's something you want to master, but it makes you feel nervous, you have to be willing to feel vulnerable and do it terribly for a while, and repeatedly, as often as you can, trusting that over time, then confidence will grow. So the thing that we do every day becomes our comfort zone. So if you want to feel more confident at something, start doing it. You can't sit at home and convince yourself to be more confident. You have to start going out. And I wouldn't say go and overwhelm yourself with the worst case scenario. You have to do something that feels a challenge but feels manageable, and then just keep repeating it until it feels like your comfort zone. I think I can do that every day now. That's fine. It doesn't really bother me anymore. Okay, so what's the next thing that's just outside that? And what else now feels a challenge? And what you find is you often don't even have to go for the worst case scenario, because as you step towards it piece by piece, always challenging yourself, your comfort zone just grows, and suddenly that thing that felt a million miles away doesn't feel so difficult anymore. It doesn't feel like the worst case scenario anymore. It feels closer to being kind of just challenging.
You give a great example in the book where you talk about the hierarchy, like you're talking about now, when it comes to public speaking. Say your ultimate fear is speaking in front of a group, giving a speech. Maybe down from there could be speaking at a party to someone where you don't know anybody. And then you go down from there and it's having a small group of friends over who you know and speaking with them. So basically what you're saying here, and I'm just trying to highlight your point, is taking an area of that hierarchy where it is uncomfortable, but not too much. And then slowly over time, as you build confidence, you can go up that ladder.
Yeah, absolutely. So graduate it, and you can literally kind of write down, okay, what is my worst case scenario? What is my feared situation? Put that at the top of your page, and then fill every other line with, okay, what's a little bit easier than that? What's a little bit easier than that? What's a little bit easier than that? And you kind of work your way down to those things that trigger a little bit of anxiety, but you could do if you were pushed. And that's what you start with, and you just work your way towards it. And what people find is, if you start working your way up that page, you only really need to get halfway before you feel that your life is transformed and everything else shifts. So, it's often how we work on things like phobias and different sort of anxiety problems.
And it ties into what we talked about earlier, where the world becomes smaller and smaller if you're not actively going into that vulnerable zone and expanding.
Yeah, you've got to be willing to be vulnerable for a while. And I think often what helps us to do that is having this arsenal of tools, right? Having something in your pocket that you're able to pull out and say, okay, I know that when I feel vulnerable and when I feel scared, I know I can do this and it will help me. And that's really what the book has been about, is sort of tooling people up with those skills to be able to deal with those feared situations and deal with situations where we might otherwise feel that we can't cope. That actually all you need is a few ideas for how you can get through something in order to feel more confident that you can cope with anything. And then you don't have to be able to predict what's going to happen. You don't have to be sure that it isn't all going to go wrong if you know that when tough things happen, you're going to use all of your resources and have your own back and do the best by yourself.
And you can always come back to what we talked about earlier, thinking about your mortality, realizing life is impermanent, and that can hopefully help you get to that next stage of vulnerability.
Yeah, I guess that's one of the tools, isn't it? Is using that perspective of, that life is short, and that can kind of trigger thoughts about, meaning and what matters today.
Couple more tools before we part ways I'd like to get into. One being journaling, and the other kind of ties into this, being gratitude. How can people go about using those as healthy tools to help them get out of feeling low?
Sure. Well, you can use them both together. And I think journaling is a great tool because a lot of people aren't talkers, right? They would never even consider going to therapy, or maybe don't have access to it, or maybe they're at a point in their lives where they're isolated and they don't really have anyone they trust around to share things with on a regular basis. And that's where journaling can be really, really helpful for constantly keeping up with that sense of perspective and self-reflection and self-awareness. And, there isn't a, gold standard, this is how you should be doing it in order for it to be helpful. Just take things out of your head and put them on the page and see what happens. And because it's there is just loads of research on it now that shows how helpful it can be to just do expressive writing. So write down how you feel about something. What are your thoughts on something that happened? Or what did you notice about this or that or the other? Or when I felt this and I did that, but when I did that, I felt something different. And it's just playing around with experience and noting it down. When we take on life as a potential learning experience, with curiosity, then journaling can be really, really helpful for that. And sometimes, when everything's sort of in your head, it can feel all screwed up, and then you put it down on the page and you give yourself a bit of bird's eye view of it. And then it's easier to then sometimes see it for what it is, and process some of the emotion that comes with it. So I'd say for journaling, it's a great thing to do. I think it's probably, throughout my life, actually, I was always someone to not necessarily talk to people, but to write things down. If I was, confused about anything or feeling lots of emotion about something, I would have that urge to sort of write it all down. And it would always help. It would always give me some sort of clarity or, process the emotion in some way. But now that there's all the research behind it, I can kind of, tell everybody else to do it as well. So that's great. And you can link up the gratitude practice with that. So, you can just do it in your mind, but you can also write those things down. So it's just, finding those moments to ask yourself, what am I thankful for? It doesn't have to be something big and profound. It could be, but it could also be something really small, and a small detail of your day. But because I think the idea is not choosing the perfect thing to be grateful for. What you're doing is, again, practicing turning your mind from potentially things that could make you feel worse to things that could make you feel better. And when you focus on gratitude in that way, you get benefits from that. But also you can practice gratitude not necessarily by writing it down, but by expressing it to people. And then you get this kind of twofold benefit where, let's say you pick someone each day, someone that means something to you, to express to them how appreciative you feel of them. So you express to them that you care about them and that you're glad they're here, or thank you for X, Y, or Z that you did the other day, and from that you get the benefit of having expressed that gratitude. They also get a benefit from feeling that appreciation from you, and you both get this benefit of improved connection between the two of you. Because the research shows that most people aren't truly aware of how much other people appreciate them, and a lot of us hold back from expressing that because we feel that it might be an awkward moment. And actually, in the research, it shows that once people do those things, they report that it was less awkward than they ever anticipated it to be, and that actually it was a really positive experience. So it's all round good stuff if we just find someone in our lives and tell them how much we appreciate them. So I would say, try it. It's really good.
I love it. Julie, you've given us so many great tools. This has been such a deep and impactful conversation. I'm going to link up your book, link up your social media, link up your website. Thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me. It's been great.
After watching my conversation with Dr. Julie, check out my chat with Dr. Stephen Hayes and learn how to unlock your mind.
If you're living inside a cage, it's made out of rice paper, and I know that it looks real. The bars look real. They're not real. You're a microsecond away from whee.